Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for the 2024 Crossroads election special. And, well, I hope you all enjoyed watching American Thought Leaders coverage just now. After my show today is going to be China in Focus, then Facts Matter with Roman, and then our sister media, NTD's big election night coverage, which I will also be part of also throughout the night. So, long night ahead. Get ready for it. And you can join me there, of course, as well. It's going to be a long day, but also interesting, and we're covering everything live. We have people on the ground all across the U.S. We're here on YouTube as well. We will not be leaving our YouTube viewers today, so if you're on YouTube, stay with us all day, all night long for the election coverage. Now, that being said, folks, again, today is election day, officially, although technically now I guess election season, but the final day of it, let's say. It's likely the final results of the election, though, are not going to be today because some states, well, they just don't count them, frankly, not until a few days after. Nevada, for example, we're not going to see the election results coming in or the early votes even being counted until several days after the election. And so anything short of a landslide, we're not really going to see things end just today. That being said, frankly, things are getting shaken up right now. We might actually see things go pretty far in one direction or the other. Both parties, on that note, are already preparing for post-election challenges, including with the Electoral College. And alongside this, states and cities are also preparing for potential protests. Now, first off, let me show what's happening in preparations on the left. Now, it seems one of the unpredictable factors, let's say, is that there's been a splintering among regular Democrat groups and the extreme left. And this is interesting. Now, let me show you what Wall Street Journal says first. They say, across America, more than a dozen progressives in various positions of influence told the Wall Street Journal that they are dreading the prospect of Trump's return to power and dismayed that half the country might see a completely different reality than they see, maybe more than that. Some are bracing for unrest, it says. And on a recent evening, more than 200 people joined a Zoom meeting titled Mass Training for Women's Safety Teams, hosted by Women's March veteran who noted its timing amid escalating political violence. Now, this woman, Danielle, the executive director of data for Progress, a liberal research group, said that she's been talking with leaders of other progressive nonprofits about how to push back if Trump is elected and fulfills his promise to exact revenge, they say, on his political enemies. I don't think he's actually said that, although he has said he's their retribution, right? Including, they say, by weaponizing arms of the federal government. Which party right now is prosecuting the other one? You tell me. So I think we'll probably see it on both sides. But it notes, she anticipates progressives will look to Democratic governors as political torchbearers and Democratic attorneys general to contest Trump initiatives, similar to how the Republican counterparts have challenged the Biden administration. In other words, probably a repeat of 2016 and of 2020. Because remember, in 2016, what happened? Well, Trump was challenged at just about every level, not even just of the other side of the aisle, but even within the Republican Party, within his own administration, among people he appointed, among people he didn't appoint, and at the state level. You might remember Trump had a very hard time getting anything done because of the pushback basically at all levels of government. Same thing Biden has faced to an extent more from the state level, and also to an extent from Congress because Republicans control, the House. Now, it notes here, though, that already the resistance movement, born of Trump's 2016 victory, has splintered. And this is a really interesting shift happening this time around. They say there's clashes between hard-edge progressives, many of whom are communists, and moderates driving out some key leaders. Now, look, the story goes on to note that many of the organizers and groups part of this whole, system were involved in protests against Trump back in 2016. And that a lot of the leaders of some of those groups are not planning to be active this time around. Of course, as we've seen politically, there are also new groups that have come about since then. But there's some interesting stuff with this, right? One of the main factors that makes things unpredictable this time around is that a lot of the groups on the far left, the communist ones, a lot of the very far left ones, have actually become divided with the main body of Democrats. One of the big contentious points has been the Israel-Gaza war. And because of that, Democratic Socialists of America, they're not endorsing Harris in many cases, not even endorsing some of the different candidates who, are on that side, even part of like the squad, for example. There's a rift taking place. My colleague Roman Balmakov posted some photos of some of the posters around New York City showing that even some of the Communist Party organizations active here in New York are saying they do not want either candidate, meaning that let's say the grassroots that used to be kind of the get out the vote drives and the protest arms of the Democrat Party, the far left, a lot of them are now splintering against the Democrats. You might remember, for example, do you remember the DNC, Democratic National Convention, and these groups were protesting against the DNC? We could see things like that. Now, look, with that said, there are a large number of groups on that edge of it, that far, far left, that could get involved with protests and riots. Now, Christopher Rufo was actually warning about this in City Journal last year. This is what he wrote in December 2023. He said, progressives are restless and ready. Left-wing activists have established a constellation of institutions to support public demonstrations, meaning, of course, protests and riots. They say protest NGOs, non-governmental organizations, media entities, news outlets, quote unquote, research centers, black bloc, Antifa networks, and bail funds. Remember, they had, of course, things to bail out people who were arrested for rioting and everything else. He says they are all finely tuned to mobilize mass movements, all of them working together. He says the left carefully manages its licit and illicit factions, legal and illegal. Progressive political leaders tacitly delegate the dirty work to anarchist and radicalist factions, which can change costumes. For example, from a BLM mask to a Palestinian keffiyeh at any moment. And we did see that, by the way. With a lot of the pro-Gaza protests, a lot of it was the same groups that were protesting for Black Lives Matter and other things. That group of the far, far left changes issues, and they're the same individuals pushing for just, again, let's say, agitation propaganda type stuff out on the streets, carrying out acts of violence sometimes, pressuring their political enemies, and protesting and rioting. That group, though, again, the wild card, is that many of that faction have broken from the main body of Democrats. As I mentioned, Democratic Socialists of America, they refused to endorse AOC, notably. AOC, part of the squad, Democratic Socialists of America refused to endorse her, at least initially, right? They've also gone against a lot of the other candidates over the Gaza issue. Same thing with a lot of these other groups. Some of the furthest left politicians, they have also refused to endorse Kamala, again, over the Gaza war. And other groups, including Black Lives Matter and even some outright communist groups, have likewise been split with the Democrats over the Gaza war. That has been the issue that has divided the normal Democrat, party from the far left. And remember, many of these groups were even protesting against the Democrats again during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. They have turned against them to an extent. Now, with that said, the machine is still in place. And going by precedent, I would personally say it is likely some of those groups could come out with protests yet again, because oftentimes they just look for events that work as catalysts. But again, we'll see, right? Typically, these groups are not just going to be like, well, party's over, time to go watch TV. As soon as they find a catalyst, an issue to latch on to, they'll probably be on the streets again. And if there's an opening for that, they'll very likely take it. Now, as for potential protests on the right, well, there aren't that many groups, let's be honest with ourselves. How often have we actually seen riots among conservatives? The closest you would have would be January 6th. Some people would say Charlottesville, which was a pretty small group, actually. And Trump, of course, again, rejected both sides, both extremes of that, although accepted the middle. Now, for the most part, the more extreme ones are not really part of the main body of Republicans. For example, groups like Patriot Front, they tend to be regarded as a psyop by most Republicans and most Trump supporters, and most of the other groups are pretty small, right? Many of these so-called alt-right ones have actually come out against Trump, including a lot of the outright neo-Nazi ones. Many of them have publicly come out to condemn Trump. They do not support him. On the Republican side, most of the preparations underway right now seem to be more on like the legal end. They're looking at legal challenges, even setting up again potentially dueling electors for the Electoral College yet again. Looking at again the lawsuits, many of which are currently underway still, and there's other things like that. They're preparing for potential lawsuits and challenges to the elections if fraud takes place or if they believe it takes place. It's also possible we could see protests and rallies, though. And very likely, depending on which way the elections go today, we could see new, stop the steal rallies like we did back in 2020. That is very likely, I'd say. CNN noted this. They said, for months, those activists who have been priming Trump supporters to believe the only way for the former president can lose in 2024 is through fraud have laid out proposals to thwart a potential Kamala Harris victory. This is CNN, folks. They say their plans include challenging results in court, pressuring lawmakers to block election certification, and encouraging protests, culminating on January 6, 2025, the day Congress will once again certify the results. Basically, here's what's happening. A lot of the media establishment, right, CNN, these other guys, they're framing any potential challenges to the elections as being driven by conspiracies. The very idea that things could be rigged is itself a conspiracy theory. That's how they're framing it. They're framing any challenges to the elections, including through lawsuits, as being basically threats against the election system and against democracy. Right? That's how they're framing it. The narratives around potential violence mostly kind of hinge on the January 6th narrative. Again, with Republicans, we never really saw them, protesting around the streets or setting buildings on fire or breaking and looting, breaking into and looting stores or beating people up on the streets. We saw that a lot on the far left, but Republicans, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen it. Again, the closest you have was January 6th. The only people killed there were Trump supporters. And of course, again, there's been a lot of not very honest reporting on that as well. Now, the other side of this, though, is the risk of more targeted attacks. And this actually is where things could become dicey. Now, the Justice Department is pointing to potential issues of people attacking election workers. And if you're looking at tensions, if people believe that they're being prevented from voting, frankly, this is a possibility, right? The department has set up a task force on this as well. This is the Justice Department. They say the Election Threats Task Force leads the department's efforts to address violence against election workers and to ensure that all election workers, whether elected, appointed, or volunteer, are able to do their jobs free from threats and intimidation. Of course, the problem here is what you define as intimidation. For example, if people are not able to cast their votes because there's issues with the systems or something like that, people might become angry about it. Do you call that intimidation, right? How do you label that, right? But they say this, announced by Attorney General Garland and launched by Deputy Attorney General Monaco in June 2021, shortly after Biden came to office. The task force engages with the election community, they call it, and state and local law enforcement to assess allegations and reports of threats against election workers, and where appropriate, has investigated and prosecuted these matters in partnership with FBI field offices and U.S. attorneys' offices throughout the country. You have them watching basically for people threatening election workers. Here's the Justice Department. They actually had a video on it earlier this year. Watch this.
The election threats that we've seen have largely targeted election officials who have been involved in recounts or tabulation of election results and threatened violence against those election officials or their staff or their family members because of a disagreement with either a tabulation or a certification or some activities of the office in which the election official works.
So, in other words, the threats they're watching for, on the right at least, they seem to me more focused on, if Democrats win and there are allegations of fraud, or they need to clear the ballots or something like that, or there are recounts or other issues like this, or votes just don't come in until days and days later, right? That's the kind of stuff a lot of Republicans are going to be watching for, is indicators of things they might believe is just, people messing with the votes. And that's the kind of stuff that the Justice Department is probably going to be monitoring for as well, going after people who target that. It is possible we could see threats like this from across the political spectrum as well, depending on how the legal challenges go. You might remember back when Trump won in 2016, what happened? Well, when Trump won, you had people making death threats against members of the Electoral College. Do you remember that? There were people trying to force the Electoral College, to go and switch their votes. Do you all remember when that happened? That was 2016 when Trump won. And of course, when Trump had dueling electors, they framed that as people trying to undermine the elections. What about the people who made death threats against the Electoral College? We never saw anything done on that. Whereas the dueling electors, some of them are being prosecuted right now. Again, this is kind of the dual reality we're looking at. Now, we'll see how things go on the legal challenges, because there will very likely be lawsuits for maybe a couple months. I doubt things are going to officially end today unless it's a landslide. It's also on this front that there are allegations of foreign countries trying to stir things up. ABC News said, for example, the FBI held a closed-door briefing on these types of threats. This is ABC News, October 31st. They said during a world-renowned law enforcement conference in Boston, 2 FBI agents briefed dozens of police chiefs and sheriffs on the wide array of threats to government officials, poll workers, candidates, and voters that the FBI has been seeing in the days before this week's presidential election. They say the closed-door briefing described to ABC News lasted nearly an hour, highlighting not only physical threats tied to the election, but also efforts by Russia and other foreign adversaries to convince Americans that the election results can't be trusted. In other words, they're setting up the stage to make it sound like any challenges to election results are Russian propaganda, or, the Russians trying to mess with us. It notes that FBI headquarters is planning to keep its National Election Command Post operational until at least November 10th, reflecting how authorities are concerned about what might happen even after the polls close on November 5th. And maybe they'll have to move it later than that, depending on how late the votes come in some states. Again, for example, in Nevada, they're saying it might take a few days. And note the command post will include senior officials from the FBI's counterterrorism, criminal, and counterintelligence and cyber divisions. And FBI leadership has told each of the agency's 55 field offices to set up their own form of a 24/7 command post. Through what that actually looks like in each case will vary depending on the office's size and location and any developments in the field, ABC News was told. In other words, there's a massive intelligence operation in place monitoring for threats against the election, at least people threatening it, right? Now look, there's also some wild cards thrown into all this. If Trump wins, let's say, for example, there's also the possibility that illegal immigrants may hold protests or riots, because Trump is saying, what did he say, right? He said day one, he's going to call in the Alien Enemies Act and deport them. He's going to be holding mass deportations. And if you have, let's say, the 10 million or so illegal immigrants allowed in under the Biden administration, or the 11 plus million that were known before that, some say up to 30 million, and let's say that 1 out of 1,000 decide they want to go out and protest, and maybe 1 out of 100,000 decides to riot, well, you're looking at a very, very serious situation. That is possible. Again, that is one of the factors kind of thrown in with all this, and something that needs to be watched. There's also groups, activist groups, that may try to rile them up as well. Now, we could see things dragged out on election results also. As I've been mentioning, Nevada, they're saying it could take a week or so to count the votes. In fact, some of the early votes, they're saying they can't even count them all for several days still. We're probably not going to see results come in from a few swing states. And kind of funny, the swing states, the ones that always have trouble with this, right? Look, unless there's a landslide victory in one way or the other, unless Trump manages to win, enough swing states, or Kamala manages to win enough of them by the end of the night tonight, it is possible that if the election is close, just a couple states delaying things could mean we don't get the answers tonight. And that could also rile people up. In fact, I think this is being anticipated by some. Now, let me show you this. This is, again, something else here.
She wins North Carolina. We could be living here in Nevada waiting and waiting and waiting. And if you remember, Nevada will take a week to count all their votes.
Well, because
we'll
they go 4 days after.
And you'll have more ballots coming in.
Yeah.
And then you're really going to be used a lot on air because this is going to be lawyers upon lawyers litigating which ballots can get fixed or cured is the language you'll start to see, those provisional ballots. So
yeah, so there you go, right? We might not see the results tonight, at least not in some states. Now, look, again, the way things are already looking, we will probably have to wait a bit unless it's a landslide. It may take a week or more. But we will, of course, be covering this pretty thoroughly tonight. And frankly, things are being shaken up quite a bit. We will see what happens. I don't want to talk too much about some of the rumors going around, but today could be a pretty significant day, folks. Now, like in other news, the FCC is suggesting that NBC, right, that they may have violated FCC rules by featuring Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live. We'll be talking about this after we come back from a quick break, so don't go anywhere.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back to our special 2024 election coverage, folks. Now, this is going to culminate tonight on NTD with an election show. I will be a guest on there as well, so stay with us all day, all night. I will see you on later tonight for that. But first, look, did you all see Vice President Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live a few days ago? Let me show you a quick refresher if you didn't see it. Watch this.
It is nice to see you, Kamala. It is nice to see you, Kamala. And I'm just here to remind you, you got this. I don't really laugh like that, do I? A little bit. Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos and end the drama.
So do you want to end the drama? Let me know in the comments what you thought of her script. I'm curious what your take is on it. But look, the FCC commissioner, Brendan Carr, he's suggesting that NBC may have actually violated FCC rules by featuring Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live right before the election because they didn't offer Trump something like this. Watch.
This is all the appearances of at least some leadership at NBC, at SNL, making clear that they wanted to weigh in favor of one candidate before the election. And that's exactly why for decades we've had an equal time rule on the book, is to prevent that. Because remember, broadcasters are placed in a special position of trust. They're not just like any other person with a soapbox on the corner. They have a license from the federal government that obligates them to operate in the public interest. And part of that is this equal time rule.
Now, look, in terms of the legalities on this, here's more on this from Fox News. They say the senior Republican on the Federal Communications Commission lambasted NBC's decision to host Vice President Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live in the final episode ahead of Election Day, while not offering equal time to former President Trump or other candidates in the presidential cycle. They note that Carr was reacting to Harris's last-minute appearance on NBC's Saturday Night Live just days ahead of Election Day, and the FCC commissioner had weighed in on X this weekend that the broadcasting company, NBC, had violated the FCC's equal time rule by hosting the Democratic presidential nominee, but not Trump or other presidential candidates such as Jill Stein or even Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is still on the election ballots because they refused to remove him in some areas after dropping out of the race earlier this year and endorsing Trump. Now, they note the Federal Elections Communications Commission's equal time rule was established in 1934 and requires radio and television broadcast stations to provide the same amount of time for competing political candidates. There are exceptions to the rule, such as newscasts, documentaries, and political debates. And so, again, we'll see what happens with it. Now, in response to this, NBC is actually offering free airtime to Donald Trump. And Washington Examiner says that after a commissioner for the Federal Elections Commission accused Saturday Night Live of violating federal rules, allowing a surprise appearance from Vice President Kamala Harris, NBC is offering former President Donald Trump's campaign free commercial time on the network. They note that since Harris appeared on SNL for 90 seconds, NBC must offer an equal amount of time to Trump's campaign to be in accordance with the FCC's equal time rule. That rule also includes a statute that allows the FCC to revoke a broadcaster's license for willful or repeated failure to offer the same amount of airtime to candidates campaigning for the same office. And according to a report, some of that time was used by the Trump campaign on Sunday during a NASCAR race. And in the ad that aired, Trump, donning a MAGA hat, spoke directly to the camera and said electing Harris would cause a depression and urged people to vote. They note it is not clear when the Trump campaign will use the remaining free airtime on the network. We'll see if he does it or not. Now, in other news, there's an update as well on the legal threats against Elon Musk. You might remember, Elon Musk is offering $1 million a day, right, this big giveaway, to swing state voters registered who sign his petition supporting First Amendment and Second Amendment rights, right? Your freedom of speech and your right to bear arms. He also just got a legal green light for it, but maybe a little too late because he was going to end it today anyways, right? Epoch Times said this: a judge has denied Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Kranzer's request to block the $1 million giveaway program that billionaire Elon Musk and America PAC have been operating in the lead up to the November 5th election today. They know that Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas Judge Angelo Foglietta issued the denial after a November 4th hearing that was prompted by Krasner's civil lawsuit against Musk and America PAC, again, Musk's political action committee. It notes the two sides had a brief hearing on October 31st, but the judge decided that he had been divested of jurisdiction after Musk filed to move the case to federal court. A federal judge then sent the case back to state court the following day, and the judge quickly responded by scheduling a hearing for November 4th, one day before the elections. The judge said at the beginning of the hearing that because another day remained for the program, he didn't think the case was moot. Musk was not in the courtroom located within Philadelphia City Hall. So basically, we'll have to see whether the case keeps going afterwards or whether the Justice Department takes it up, because allegedly the Justice Department was even threatening Elon Musk, suggesting that he may be violating the law using this petition drive in ways they say may incentivize people to register to vote. Again, it was a petition opened only for registered voters in swing states. But for now, at least, it does seem the program is being allowed to continue. The issue is, though, it was supposed to end today anyway. So it's a little too late, frankly. And the legal challenges of this, even though they were thrown out in the end, they did seem to have the effect of stopping Elon Musk from holding this petition drive as planned. And some people might suggest that maybe that's election interference, in fact, like lawfare, because they used a legal case to delay something until it was too late and now it doesn't matter. Now, before we jump into questions today, after my show, we're going to be showing China in Focus and then Facts Matter with Roman. And then our sister media, NTD, they're going to have their big election night coverage on which I will be a part of throughout the night. So join me there. I'll be on late tonight. It's going to be a long and interesting day and night. And we're covering everything live. So make sure you stay with us for our election coverage. The link is here on the screen or in the description below. So once you check our live chat again, You can watch Tiffany Meyer next and then Roman Balmakov after that. And again, stay around because we'll be doing live election coverage all night long. You can join me late night for that. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions. Let's see here. All right. Megan Pfister, you're saying, what kind of tea do you drink today? So I drink coffee usually in the mornings. I switch to tea usually in the afternoon. I'm going all day, all night today, so I'm drinking coffee yet again. So it's a coffee day today. On the note of tea, when I was in Taiwan, I picked up some great oolong tea. And when I was in Korea, I got some great green tea, and so I've been enjoying that when I do drink tea. But in the mornings, it's been coffee lately. Ashley from California, you said, I would be so happy if California went red. I know it's like near impossible. It would be awesome. Actually, it is possible, and here's why. California was a red state until Ronald Reagan gave amnesty or citizenship to illegal immigrants. When he granted, again, citizenship to illegal immigrants, right, a lot of them being Mexican immigrants and so on, California went from a red state to a blue state. And it was mostly those voters who flipped the state. Now things are different because a lot of Latino voters are going to Trump. And given that circumstance, right, given the fact that a lot of Latino voters are going to him, California could be kind of up there. We don't know how it's going to go. Really, I think this election year is very unpredictable, I think, to say the least. This election year is very unpredictable because, this is how I look at things. I look at what are the bases, right? A politician will have to do a few things to win an election. They have to unite the base, right? Make sure that they get unity among factions. Which side got unity among factions? The Democrat Party, did they establish unity or have they become divided? Well, the Israel-Gaza war lost them some of the far left. Democrat Socialists of America, some of the communist groups, even some old voting bases. So they've actually been fractured, right? They've been fractured to an extent. On the Trump side, he's actually rallied new bases. He got, for example, some of the independents like RFK Jr., a moderate Democrat, some would say, and also the people more on the health side of things. He got people like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, who were kind of, middle or Democrat, depending on how you viewed it. I'd say they're actually more like libertarian types, at least in my personal opinion. He actually got them to come out and endorse him. He's also gotten a lot of new voters from the Latino base, which Republicans didn't have before. He's also gotten a small bump in the Black American vote, roughly from about 11% to like 25% or around that, depending on who you go by. And so actually he's managed to not only unite the Republican Party, but he's managed to bring in different factions. And so I look at things like that. The other side of it is narrative. What were the narratives going into the election, and would those narratives turn voters who maybe were on the fence or maybe had different opinions before? The main narratives among the Democrats were Trump is a racist, Trump is a fascist, Trump likes Hitler and that kind of stuff, right? And then, of course, the sexual allegations and things like that. Basically, the things they've been doing since 2016. Now, that means to me that if voters weren't sold on that back in 2016, they're probably not going to be sold on it now. It's really the same narrative. I will say the January 6th narrative actually did probably cost Trump some support. I do know personally some people who voted for Trump back in 2016 who do not like him because of January 6th. I have talked to some voters like that. So that's one narrative that could become a little unpredictable in terms of how it moves people. On the Trump side, what were the big narratives? On the Trump side, it's economy. On the Trump side, the big narratives going into elections were Peanut the squirrel. Peanut the squirrel, funny enough. The Joe Rogan interview made waves. That actually probably got him quite a few voters. Elon Musk flipping in favor of him again, being kind of an unpredictable factor in all this. All RFK Jr. bringing in his faction. and other things like that. It is possible Trump was managed to bring in some voters he might not have had before. There was also the McDonald's photo op. I don't know if that would actually flip voters, but we'll see. There's, again, a lot of unpredictable factors here that could change the conventional perception we have of which way even states go that are not swing states. California could be unpredictable this time. Again, mainly because of the shifts in the Latino vote. We will see. Joe PMC Adams, you're saying, took the whole family to vote this morning. My youngest, 12 years old, received a future voter sticker. I didn't really give those. That's great. Good stuff. Yeah, folks, if you haven't gone out to vote today, make sure you do. I early voted. My first time early voting. So we will see. Now, on the note of the votes, it has been noted by a lot of different media, even CNN, for example. Historically, Democrats tend to be the ones who early vote more. Republicans tend to be the ones who come in on election day. They say that Democrats win through the early vote, Republicans win on election day. That is one of the real unpredictable things this time around, because depending on which state you're looking at, early voting, CNN, for example, was saying that Democrats got less early voting than anticipated in many areas. Republicans got significantly more. Now, Republicans who tended to be maybe a little more wary before about early voting maybe decided to do that more this time. And so it's unpredictable what the numbers of people going to the polls today on November 5th are going to be. That's going to be the real unpredictable factor here. And again, whether it's new voters, and also because the other big unpredictable factor is early voting doesn't show you who they voted for. States that report party affiliation, they'll say either Republican, Democrat, or other. And if somebody, for example, is registered Democrat and they vote Trump, or someone's registered Republican and they vote Kamala, or if someone is, other, whether Libertarian or Green Party, whatever else, and they decide to vote for someone, that's not going to show up in the polling. So it's very unpredictable right now. I would say it's very unpredictable. We've never had an election like this, frankly. I feel like maybe we're going to say that every 4 years, but we're seeing factors this time around we didn't see before. So a lot of it is very unpredictable. Judy Akeem, you're saying, will they say the same if Trump wins? Will they say election challenges are Russian propaganda? Probably. Probably. Frankly, it's going to be odd, though, because remember, basically the narrative for the last 4 years during the entire Biden administration has been that Trump is trying to overthrow democracy, that he assaulted the Capitol, that he was trying to get, what they call electoral college voters to become dueling electors, basically undermining the electoral college. And that's been the narrative, right? That's been the narrative to try to tear down Trump and make him look like he's trying to become Hitler and overthrow democracy. That's been the narrative. But if you go back to 2016, the Democrats were doing a lot of the same things. The Democrats, for example, they also had mass protests and riots. Theirs were not just against the Capitol, it was all the major cities in a lot of places. The Democrats had actual violence on the streets, political violence with Antifa. They not only tried messing with the Electoral College, they were making death threats, not saying the party itself, but some individuals, death threats against Electoral College voters, trying to make them switch their votes, not even become dueling electors, but trying to make them switch their votes. Now, we'll see how things, and then of course there was the Russian narrative that lasted well into, all through Trump's administration until finally at the very end it was shown to be fake. Now, that being said, will they do the same thing this time around if Trump wins, now that they've basically had the opposite narrative the last 4 years, making it sound like if you do that, you're trying to overthrow the country, basically? Probably, frankly. This is the unfortunate reality with American politics, is that there's a lot of it is just narrative. I I tend to not take it very seriously when one party acts like they're offended about something, because as soon as the tables turn, they'll be the ones doing the thing they claim they were offended about, 4 years ago. That's just the reality of it. Maybe we'll watch them raid the Capitol this time around if Trump wins. You know what I mean? Although, actually, on that note, they probably will have better security this time if that does happen, right? Let's see. Wowzed my pants. You're saying, amazing how they are all these rules in place all over that don't get enforced unless you're a squirrel. Peanut the squirrel, folks. Trump has been posting about Peanut as well. Just going, of course, looking at X, formerly known as Twitter, a lot of people are posting squirrel memes. Donald Trump is posting about the squirrels. A lot of the Republican, commentators are posting about squirrels. People are posting images and memes of Lord of the Rings, where Aragorn at the very end, for Frodo, and he's saying for Peanut, and rushing through the gates of Mordor. You have that happening. As I've been saying, actually, the killing of Peanut the squirrel is probably something that will actually get people out to vote. For those of you who don't know about Peanut the squirrel or Fred the raccoon, this may sound confusing. You can watch yesterday's episode. We talked about it. Basically, what happened is in New York State, there was a guy who was an online influencer, and he had a rescue squirrel. The squirrel's mom had been hit by a car and was killed. He rescued this baby squirrel. He raised the squirrel. He also had a rescue raccoon, Fred the raccoon. And these animals were internet celebrities. He set up his house as an animal sanctuary. He was doing viral TikTok videos of the little squirrel in a cowboy hat and being all friendly with him. Somebody complained about the squirrel. The New York State, they sent 7 government agencies to go and raid the guy's house, questioned his wife's immigration status, followed him to his bathroom, treated the guy like he was Al Capone or something like that, right? Really, raided his house, ransacked it, took the squirrel, took the raccoon. Then they claimed the squirrel bit them, and they had to kill the squirrel to test it for rabies, and then they just killed the raccoon also for some unknown reason. And, people are pointing to this now. People are pointing to this now and saying, well, look, why do you send 7 government agencies to go and kill a squirrel that was a domesticated squirrel? And there's never been a case of a squirrel passing rabies to a human, by the way. Therefore, what's the big concern here? Why do you put that much resource into killing a pet squirrel when you have Tren de Aragua recruiting kids in Times Square to go and rob people at gunpoint, and because of New York law, all they get is family court and they're released back onto the streets? Why is it that serious crime has very little consequence, but you rally 7 government agencies to go and kill someone's pet squirrel? That's kind of the political narrative here. That being said, you do actually see some of the Democrat-aligned media talking about Peanut and Fred the raccoon, but they're not talking about it in political terms. They're just talking about it on animal rights or something like that. That's kind of their narrative. But I do think that Peanut the squirrel could get people out to vote. It's been kind of the rallying cry as people go to the polls. Peanut the squirrel turned out to be kind of the early November, maybe not the October surprise, but the early November surprise, because Peanut the squirrel has become the rallying banner for Republicans now. Enthos32, you're saying squirrel lives matter, and they do, right? I was watching some videos of that squirrel. That squirrel looked like it was a really friendly squirrel. I mean, I feel bad for it. You could tell the squirrel really loved its owner, actually. Johnny Mack, you're saying, Josh, it seems the further we move from faith, the further we get from freedom. Have we seen this with other countries in history? Absolutely. Actually, Solzhenitsyn said this. Solzhenitsyn, who of course wrote the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn, who is one of the bigger critics of the Soviet Union, he has a very famous line where he says that, when he was young and they were talking about the Bolshevik Revolution and, the genocides or democides that happened in Russia under the Soviet Union, where the communists there just killed people by the tens of millions. He said when he was younger, people would say, how did this happen? How could this have happened? And Solzhenitsyn said, not his exact words, but he said the older people would say, it happened because we forgot God. Solzhenitsyn said as he's grown older and he's tried to explain this, actually he said there's, if people ask him, how did this happen? He would say there's no better explanation. It happened because we forgot God. That was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, right? Not his exact words, but relatively what he said. Actually, if you understand the nature of freedom, the balance between freedom and tyranny, tyranny is only necessary when people lose the ability of self-governance. You can't really have self-governance without a moral foundation because it depends on people being able to take care of themselves and working hard and taking ownership. And, if you walk down the street and you see some trash on the ground, maybe you pick it up, right? Rather than saying, no, that's the government's job to pick up that trash. It's the government's job to build this bridge. It's the government's job to protect my family. It's the government's job to take care of me, to pay my bills, and so on and so on and so on. When people don't have individual responsibility, where they view their own lives and their own well-being as something that they're responsible for, and also, even caring about their neighbors. Look at the Amish, for example, the way they can come together. It's people taking responsibility for themselves and also trying to help their community and those around them, who tend to be the more faithful types, who have a moral backbone, right? I'm not saying this just religious people. In fact, one of my best friends, actually, he's an atheist. One of my best friends, actually, or maybe agnostic is a way to put it. And, he lives in Florida. Hurricanes were coming. He stayed behind. He sent his family to New Jersey. And, the hurricanes hit in Tampa, and he stayed afterwards to help out his neighbors, But again, I think it comes down to people taking responsibility. You need to have people who feel a responsibility for themselves, for their own behavior, for their own well-being, and also have at least some degree of caring about their neighbors, right? I'm not saying like communism, because communism does that by force. Communism, people say like communism is you have 2 cows and you give one to your neighbor. No, it's not. That's like tradition. Communism is when you have 2 cows and the government holds you at gunpoint, maybe kills one of your family members and then steals it, then cuts it up and redistributes it, maybe takes half for themselves. That's communism. Forced redistribution is not charity, right? Forced redistribution is theft, not charity. That being said, though, once people lose the capability of individual sovereignty, once people become incapable of taking care of themselves, they then begin relying more on external things. And it's those external things that then begin getting, control over them because there's kind of this sliding scale of whether you can manage freedom yourself or whether you're incapable of it because you lack the moral foundation for it, right? Freedom does require a moral base, and that's the reality of it. Unfortunately, this is kind of the narrative. On the other side of the spectrum, people say, hey, should people be allowed to own guns? It depends on whether people can be responsible with them, frankly. I'm very much pro-Second Amendment personally, but I also hear terrible stories from police officers about people killing each other for really stupid reasons. That's the other side of it. And there is the question of whether people still have the moral foundation that's required to have the freedoms we enjoy. Personally, I would say that freedom fosters morality when you have a strong system of justice to punish people for, violating normal laws without the need to create new laws. And there's consequence in place, right? I think that actually having a system of freedom where if you don't take responsibility for yourself, you're probably going to fail at life and you're not going to have a good time, actually does reinforce individuals to go and actually, care about their well-being, which means doing things right. that if you don't want to be homeless on the street, well, you're probably going to have to get a job, and you're probably going to have to work and take care of your family and be responsible for those around yourself. And nobody's going to do it for you. Actually, I can say that I know with myself and other people I've known, the point of going from being a boy to a man was when I realized that I was responsible for my own well-being. And if I don't take responsibility for myself, then nobody else is going to do it. That's kind of the jump you have to take, right? And unfortunately, when you lack a system of freedom, a lot of people never make that jump. Let's see here. Jeffrey Bowdick, you're saying, not all women will vote for Harris because of abortion. Many will vote for Trump because they disagree with abortion. That is true. I did talk to a lot of people on that. Again, when I was in Georgia talking to potential voters, I will say a lot of the women I talked to who are voting Democrat, almost across the board, they talked about abortion. A lot of the women I talked to who were pro-Trump talked about women's rights as well, but it was more like, they were against abortion, actually. They see abortion as something harmful to women or damaging to family values. That being said, Trump, even though the media has framed Trump as being anti-abortion, he actually took kind of a more middle stance on it. Trump's stance with that is let the states handle it. Trump's saying it's not the role of the federal government to do it. The reason he gets blamed for abortion bans is because he appointed a couple of Supreme Court justices, and the Supreme Court made the determination that it's up to the states, not the federal government. That's the technicality with it. Personally, I think for me, I view abortion as more like a religious thing. It's more on whether you believe in the human soul or not, whether you believe a life is a life before birth. I personally believe a life is a life before birth. For me, it's a religious thing. I view abortion as no different from killing a person or putting a gun to somebody's head and shooting them on the street, frankly. I just view it as killing, personally, because I believe in the human soul. You know what I mean? Personally. Let's see. Amy Khan, you're saying, the size of government is inversely proportional to the ethics of its society. That is true. And on the other side of it, when you look at a society that does not have strong government, that has maybe very weak government, and also lacks morality, you tend to see the country controlled by communist groups oftentimes, but by gangs and cartels and those types of things. When people don't have a strong moral foundation, and you also don't have government stepping in to kind of fill that gap, that's typically when you see countries being controlled by terrorist groups, by totalitarian mafias, by gang members, by cartels, that kind of thing, which is unfortunately the situation in some countries as well. I think America is still kind of a rarity on earth in terms of being able to have a pretty decent degree of freedom while also not having cartel control and stuff like that. Although with the way that light on crime policies have been going and gangs are actually able to kind of wreak havoc now, unless something's done to actually crack down on gangs, it's possible we're heading that way as well. So we'll see. RealityIsReal.com, you're saying self-reliance mixed with an equal amount of kindness is a good recipe for long-term prosperity. And I fully agree with that, actually. This is kind of the other side of it. Maybe this is more like the religious argument for social stability. I don't think you're going to have any form of government that can create social stability unless people have a certain moral base. I think actually that morality is the foundation of a solid society. A lot of traditional societies and traditional beliefs like Confucianism or Christianity would say that the family unit is kind of the central point of social stability, because your family, your love for your family, raising kids with strong values and responsibility for each other, the recognition of, kindness towards other people who aren't yourself, that a lot of that starts from the family. And when societies start losing family values, then you start seeing the butterfly effect of that, where people, start to not really have, you start to see more like sociopathic behavior when people don't have that. And so I personally think the family is like the bedrock of society. And I think that when you learn to be responsible for your family, from that, actually, you start to feel responsibility for others as well. I come from again, a mixed race family, so I kind of see different cultures with it. My family's kind of like tribal, at least on my dad's side. And so, loyalty to like family members is a big thing for my family. But of course, you learn to deal with family. You learn to deal with the uncle who's kind of crazy and you don't agree with everything he says. You learn to deal with your cousins who are going to take, way too much food on Thanksgiving and take all the bacon, like my cousin William, for example. You deal with things like that. And you learn to care about people despite minor infractions to your self-interest. A family system helps kind of create that morality, I think. All right, folks. That said, tonight is election night. We have a special episode today. If you're watching on YouTube, we're not going to break. We're going straight through all day, all night long. Tiffany Meyer is up next with China in Focus. After that, after Tiffany Meyer is going to be Roman Balmakov with Facts Matter. And so we have a lot of stuff lined up still. I will be, after that, joining NTD Television, and they're going to be doing an all-night broadcast. We'll see how things go, because unless it's a landslide victory, we probably will not know the final results of the election for a few days, but we'll probably have a pretty good idea of which way things are leaning by the night's end. And frankly, there's a lot of really unpredictable factors right now. There's a lot of factors right now that we've never seen before, frankly. In particular, one of the biggest ones is early voting by Republicans. You might remember last time in the 2020 elections, Republicans were not pushing for early voting. They were not pushing for a lot of the things that have become kind of the normal way of voting. Republicans were legally challenging it last time. And Republicans tended to avoid it because they thought it was going to be part of fraud or whatever else. This time around, there's been a huge push for early voting drives. You also have a lot of groups doing get out the vote drives. You have a lot of groups doing, for example, mass voter registration. On the Republican side, Democrats used to be really heavy on that. Republicans have now kind of stepped up to that as well. And of course, frankly, it's been a pretty wild season leading up to the elections. Democrats, again, Joe Biden was the original candidate. Biden stepped out of the race, or pushed out, depending on how you look at it. And then Kamala came in pretty late. Will that affect things? We don't actually know. You've also had a lot of celebrities come out, like Taylor Swift and Lady Gaga and those folks going for Kamala. You've also had a lot of like internet celebrities like Joe Rogan and so on coming out for Trump. We've not seen an election like this. There's a lot of things that are very unpredictable. Now, as I've been noting, again, I will be doing a very long broadcast today. I'm going to be on NTD later. If you're watching on YouTube, it should be the same link. We're going all day, all night, folks. So join me for the live. But again, there's a lot of unpredictable things with this. We could see this get dragged on for a while, including especially with some of the legal challenges and some interesting times ahead. But hey, we're in it together. We're in this together. So join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and join me tonight on NTD for the broadcast, and stick around too with some other great shows coming up. Folks, click the link in the description or live chat to watch Tiffany or Roman. And again, join me tonight. I will be starting around 6 p.m. on NTD, and I'll be going, I don't know how late, but it'll be a long night. That said, folks, thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.